working with rules of exponents. So we're going to skip the ones that have a star once again. If you do those, you can get some bonus points. But I'm going to start with number 3. So here's a pretty simple product rule. So we're multiplying p squared times p to the 6th. That means we're going to add the exponents together. That gives me p to the 8th, which is a. For number 4, we're going to do power rule and then product rule. So first I need to distribute this 4. This is going to drop down, xy to the 3rd, times, I get x to the 4th, y to the 4th. From here I'm going to add my exponents together. This is x to the 1st. So I'm going to add together 1 plus 4, that gives me x to the 5th. And then for y, I'm going to add together 3 plus 4, which gives me y to the 7th. So x to the 5th, y to the 7th, that answer is C. Number 5, I'm using power rule, which means I'm going to distribute the 3. That means that I'm cubing everything. So 3 cubed means I have 3 times 3 times 3, which is 27. Then with the exponents, I'm going to multiply. 2 times 3 is x to the 6th. 2 times 3 is y to the 6th. So 27 x to the 6th, y to the 6th. I'm also using the power rule here. I'm going to distribute this 2 to everything. Negative 4 squared means I have negative 4 times negative 4, which is a positive 16. C to the 3rd times 2 gives me c to the 6th, and then I have d squared. For number 7, first I'm going to use the power rule. I'm going to distribute this 3, and the 5ab is just going to drop down for the next step. Negative 2 to the 3rd means I have negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4, times a negative 2 is a negative 8. A to the 2 times 3 gives me a to the 6th, and then I have b to the 3rd. Next, I'm going to multiply these coefficients together. I get a negative 40. These both have a coefficient of 1, so when I add these together, a to the 1 plus 6 gives me a to the 7th. And then b to the 1 plus 3 is b to the 4th. And the answer is D. Number 8, I'm going to use product rule. 3 times 6 is 18. And then my exponents, I have a negative 2 plus 1. So I'll write that out. X is negative 2 plus 1. Negative 2 plus 1 is negative 1. So I have x to the negative 1. And then for y, I have 1 plus negative 3. Well, 1 plus negative 3 is negative 2. And I can't have negative exponents, so these are going to have to drop down. The 18 will stay on top, so I have 18 over xy squared, which is A. And skipping number 9, we'll do number 10. Here I'm going to use the quotient rule. First, I want to try and find a common factor between 3 and 12. Both of those are divisible by 3. So 3 divided by 3 is 1 on top. 12 divided by 3 gives me a 4 on bottom. For my exponents, I'm going to subtract 5 minus 3 and then 1 minus 2. So x is 5 minus 3, which gives me x squared. And then y to the 1 minus 2 is y to the negative 1. I can't have negative exponents, so that'll go down. The x squared will go up. And I already have a top and bottom with my fraction. So on top with the 1, I'm going to have x squared. And on the bottom, I'll have my 4 and my y. So that is how I get D. All right, we're going to flip to the next page and do 11 and 12. Once again, I'm going to be using quotient rule, but first I need to use power rule. I'm going to distribute these exponents. So I get 12, x to the negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. And on bottom I get 4, x to the negative 2 times negative 3 is a positive 6. So I'm looking for a common factor between 12 and 4. Both of these numbers are divisible by 4. My pen has given up on me. There we go. And then I have negative 8 minus 6. So 12 divided by 4, 12 divided by 4 gives me a 3 on top. And then 4 divided by 4 is 1 on bottom. So I really just have 3. And then negative 8 minus 6 gives me a negative 14. I can't have a negative exponent, so I need to drop it down to the bottom. The 3 will stay on top, so I have 3x to the 14th. Oops. 3 over x to the 14th, which is D. And 12, first I'm going to use the power rule. I need to distribute this 3 to everything. So I have negative 2 cubed, which is negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. This gives me negative 8. M squared to the third gives me m to the 2 times 3, which is 6. N to the 3 times 3 is 9. On the bottom, I have m to the 2 times 3, which is 6, and n to the 4 times 3, which is 12. When I go to simplify this, I have my negative 8 still on top. M to the 6 and m to the 6, they cancel, and when I do 9 minus 12, I get n to the negative 3. I can't have a negative exponent on top, so I drop it down, and I get negative 8 over n to the third. All right, 13, 14, and 15, you can do those for extra credit. So now I'm on the last page, which deals with radical expressions and equations. In this first section, we're just going to be simplifying. So for this first example, I have a coefficient of 5, so I want to remember that, and that is going to come out in front when I simplify. Then I need to break down the 112. It ends in a 2, so it's even. I might try dividing it by, 16 first, and that worked. I got 7. So 16 and 7. 16 splits into 4 and 4, and 7 is prime. It can't be factored. So my groups here, I have a group of 4s, and I have a 7 left over. So the 4 comes out. Whoops. The 4 comes out, and the 7 stays in. So when I multiply 5 times 4, I get 20 square root of 7, and that's my final answer. Next, I pay attention. I have a coefficient of negative 1, so I'm going to keep the negative. 44 splits into 4 and 11. 4 splits into 2 and 2, and 11 is prime, so it can't be factored. Then I've got to deal with my exponents. A couple of these exponents are really big, so if you're still struggling with these, you can draw them all out and then make groups, but here's the easier way. Since I'm taking the square root, what I'm trying to do is make groups of 2. So A has an odd exponent. 7 can't make even groups of 2, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is split off one of them, which leaves me with 6. Then I can divide 6 by 2, which gives me a to the 3, and another a to the 3. So a to the 3 plus a to the 3 is a to the 6. And then I have this a to the 1. So I have a group of a to the 3, and I have an a left over. So with b to the 16, this is even, so I can make even groups. So 16 divided by 2 gives me b to the 8th. So I have a group of b to the 8th. So when I simplify, anything that's circled is going to come out, and anything that's boxed is going to stay in. So first, I should probably make this a little more clear. I have my negative from the front, and I'm going to take out a 2. I'm going to take out an a cubed. I'm going to take out a b to the 8th, and inside I'm going to leave 11a. And that is my answer. Oops. Actually, I might drop this down. Okay. Number 3, remember we have a coefficient of 2, so I'm going to bring that out in front. And then I'm just going to start, actually I'll put it over here. I'm going to start factoring 108. It's an even number, so I might try dividing it by 16. That doesn't work. I could try dividing it by 4, and I get 4 and 27. 4 splits into 2 and 2. 27 splits into 3 and 9. 9 splits into 3 and 3. Since I'm taking the square root, I'm making groups of 2, so I have a group of 2s, a group of 3s, and 1 3 left over. I need to do the same thing with my exponents. X to the 9th, 9 is an odd number, so I want to go ahead and break off an x so that I have an even number, which would give me x to the 8th. Then I can divide 8 by 2 because that's my root, and I get, x to the 4th and x to the 4th. So I have a pair of x to the 4th and an x left over. For y squared, I just have y times y. I have a pair of y's. And z to the 14th, 14 divided by 2 gives me z to the 7th and z to the 7th. So I have a pair of those. So I already brought my 2 out in front. I'm also going to take out another 2 and a 3. I'm also going to take out x to the 4th. I'm going to take out a y and a z to the 7th. Inside the root, I'm going to have a 3 and an x. So when I multiply this, 2 times 2 is 4, times 3 gives me 12. X to the 4th, y, z to the 7th, and then I have the square root of 3x. Moving on to number 4, 5, and 6, notice that these are all cube roots. So we're now playing the game make groups of 3. We're not playing the game make groups of 2 anymore. So 189, it's not even, it doesn't end in 5, it doesn't end in 0, so I might try dividing it by 9, and that works. I get 9 and 21. 9 splits into 3 and 3, 21 splits into 3 and 7, and so I have 3 3s with a 7 left over. So the 3 comes out, the 7 stays in, and remember I'm taking the third root, so I have to put a 3 there, otherwise it's wrong. Here I'm taking the third root of negative 16a to the 4th. When you have a negative on the inside of a cubed root, you want to kind of split that off, take a negative 1, and then you have a 16. 16 splits into 4 and 4, and then 2 and 2, 2 and 2. Negative 1, you can multiply negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1 to get negative 1. So I can take out a negative 1, I can take out a 2, and then I'll leave in a 2. But I need to deal with these a's. Since it's only a to the 4th, I'll go ahead and draw those out. So I can make one group of a's to come out, and one a will stay in. So on the inside, I have 2a. So negative 1 times 2 is negative 2a, square root of 2a. Looking at number 6, I'm taking the third root of 320, m to the 15th, n to the 7th. So 320, I can divide by 10, and I get 32. 32 can be divided by 8 to get 4. 10 can be 5 and 2. 8 breaks into 4 and 2. And then 2 and 2. So I'm looking for groups of 3, and sorry, I can break this down. So I have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and a leftover 5. So I'll be able to take out 2 groups of 2. M to the 15th, that's a lot of m's to draw, so this time I can try and divide it by 3 because my index is 3. So 15 divided by 3, that would give me 3 groups of m to the 5th. Because 5 plus 5 plus 5 is 15, so I can take out an m to the 5th, and then n to the 7th, 7 isn't divisible by 3, so I can take an n by itself, and then I'm left with n to the 6th, which is divisible by 3. I get 3 groups of n squared. So, the first thing that's going to come out, are my 2 groups of 2. So I have 2 times 2. I'm going to take out m to the 5th. I'm going to take out n squared. And on the inside, I have a 5 and an n. So 2 times 2 is 4, m to the 5th, n squared, and whoops, I have to include, and I didn't do it on the last one either, you have to put a cubed root. We're taking the cubed root, so n squared, and then I'm taking the cubed root of 5n. So this is this isn't an exponent, that's actually the root. Alright, so the next section, adding, subtracting, we can skip, we didn't cover that. And we're moving on to multiplying radicals. So when we multiply coefficients together and then radicands together. I have a coefficient of 5 and a coefficient of 1. So 5 times 1 is 5. 6 times 27 is 162. That goes inside the radical, and then it can factor down. Because I just multiplied 6 and 27 to get there, I'm going to factor it down to 6 and 27. This breaks to 2 and 3, this breaks into 3 and 9, and then a 3 and a 3. So I'm looking for groups of 2. I have 2 3s, 2 3s, and a leftover 2. So don't forget my coefficient of 5. I'm going to take out a 3, and a 3, and I'm going to leave behind this 2. So 5 times 3 times 3 gives me 45, square root of 2. Okay, for the next one, I'm going to multiply my coefficients 7 and negative 3. I get negative 21. And then 10 times 18 gives me the square root of 180. I'm going to break this down into 18 and 10. And, whoops, 18 can break into 9 and 2, 2 and 5, 3 and 3. And I'm making groups of 2. So group of 2, and I have a 5 left over. I have a coefficient of negative 21 that I need to keep. I'm going to multiply that by 3 times 2, and I'm going to leave behind my 5. So 21 times 3 times 2 gives me negative 126, square root of 5. Okay, here we have no coefficients, but we're going to multiply the insides, including the variables. So on the inside of this radical, I have 5 times 8, which is 40. And then when I'm multiplying x squared times x to the third, I'm going to add the exponents. So x to the 2 plus 3 gives me x to the 5th. I'm taking the square root, so I want to make groups of 2. Inside of 40, I can break it into 5 and 8, 2 and 4, 2 and 2. So I have a group of 2's, and I have a 5 and a 2 left over. X to the 5th, I can split it into x and x to the 4th. 4 divided by 2 gives me x squared and x squared. So I have a group of x squareds with the x left over. So I bring out my 2 and my x squareds. And on the inside, I have 5 times 2, which is 10x. All right, on the back, we're going to skip this top section. We didn't cover that. And we're going to finish off with the dividing radicals. So for this first one, I have the square root of 48 over 3, which means I'm taking the square root of 48 over the square root of 3. The first thing I want to do first is see if I can split this up at all. So I have 8 and 6, 4 and 2, 2 and 3, 2 and 2. So I have a group of 2's, another group of 2's, and a 3 left over. So that gives me 2 times 2, which is 4, square root of 3 over square root of 3. Now you can't have a square root of 3 in the bottom. You can't have any square root in the bottom. However, before I rationalize, I should see that I have a square root of 3 also on top. So these can cancel each other out. And I'm left with just 4. So this just equals 4. On the next one, I want to break these down. I have 9 and 2, 3 and 3. So I can take out a 3, leave a 2 behind. So I get 3 square root of 2. On the bottom, 75 must be divisible by 5, so I get 5 and 15, which breaks into 5 and 3. So I can take out a 5 and leave in a 3. I cannot have a square root on the bottom, so I'm going to multiply top and bottom by the square root of 3. On top, I keep my coefficient of 3. Square root of 2 times square root of 3 is square root of 6. And on bottom, square root of 3 times square root of 3, I'm going to have my 5 first, and that just undoes the radical, so I have a regular 3. Before I simplify, I can notice that these 3's cancel, so I should just be left with the square root of 6 over 5. Oops. Final answer there. All right, we're going to try and simplify this one first because the numbers are quite large. 56 will break down into 8 and 7. 8 will break into 4 and 2, and then 2 and 2. So I have a pair of 2's, and then I have 2 times 7 left over. So don't forget about the 6. So I have 6 times 2, square root of 2 times 7, which is 14. On the bottom, I'm going to keep my 2, and I'm going to factor this down. And I get 9 and 7. 9 breaks into 3 and 3. Oops. So I have a pair of 3's and a leftover 7. Take out the 3, leave behind the 7. Before I move forward, I see that these 2's cancel, and 3 and 6 can actually simplify. If I divide them both by 3 on top, I will get a 2 square root of 14. And on bottom, I will get 3 divided by 3, which is 1, so I'll just have square root of 7. Now, I can't have a square root on bottom, so I need to multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 7. On top, I get 2 square root of 14 times 7 is 98. And on the bottom, square root of 7 times square root of 7 is just 7. Now, 98 can also factor down. I know it's divisible by 7. When I break it 7, I get 14, and then 7 and 2, so I can take out a 7 and leave behind a 2. So I get 2 times 7 square root of 2 over 7, and then these 7's cancel, so I'm left with just 2 square root of 2. All right, for this next one, I'm taking the square root of 12, dividing by the square root of 5. 12 can factor into 4 and 3, 2 and 2, so I can take out a 2, leave behind a 3, 2 square root of 3 on top, and square root of 5 on bottom. I cannot have a square root on the bottom, so I'm going to multiply both by square root of 5. On top, I get 2 times 3 times 5 gives me the square root of 15, and on the bottom, square root of 5 times itself just gives me a 5. 15's factors are 3 and 5, but I have no pairs, so this is actually my final answer, 2 square root of 15 over 5. Here I have 2 over 6 square root of 2. I could right away simplify this. They're both divisible by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1 over 6 divided by 2 is 3 square root of 2. I can't have this square root on the bottom, so I'm going to multiply by it on top and bottom. On top, I get 1 square root of 2, or just square root of 2. And on bottom, these become just plain 2. So I have 3 times 2, which simplifies to square root of 2 over 6. And for the last one, I'm going to simplify first. 8 splits into 4 and 2, and then 2 and 2. And I can also simplify here. They're both divisible by 4. So 20 divided by 4 is 5. And then I'm also taking out a 2 and leaving behind a 2. And on the bottom, 4 divided by 4 is 1, so I just have square root of 3. I can't have the square root of 3 on bottom, so I'm going to multiply it. And I get 5 times 2, which is 10. Square root of 2 times 3, which is 6, divided by square root of 3 times square root of 3, which is plain 3. All right, and then we are going to skip these last two, and that is it for your